Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I bring us the annual deficiency bill. We do this every year as one of the co-chairs of Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee. I'm sure we're tired of all talking about regs now, and it's been a busy year, but not so much in the committee, really. You know, it's every month we meet and we review all the regulations that come before us, whether it's an agency promulgating a regulation or updating a regulation, or maybe something we passed and we're getting that promulgated to make sure our intent is being followed, the agencies are not stepping out of bounds. And on average, we do about 600 regulations a year. Again, I love my staff in Reg Review. If you ever have any questions, you will not find better or more helpful people. They're in the basement. Go see them, please. That being said, Mr. Speaker, this year we did have a grand total of 5 regulations that we did find deficient, unfortunately. Typically, we do try to work things out between all parties involved, and it was just unfortunate we couldn't do that with these 5. You'll even recall a Senate Bill 23 that we passed earlier in the session that would allow informational review, which I found very helpful. But anyway, going forward, I guess I'll start with what came over from the Senate. So what came over from the Senate was 2 proposed regulations that we were going to find deficient. They were from Department of Medicaid Services, 907 KAR 1044, coverage provisions and requirements regarding community mental health center behavioral health services, and then also 907 KAR 15005, which contained definitions. So both of these, I had an organization in my area reach out to me, Mountain Comp, and it was affecting across the state. But currently, if you are a mental health counselor, you are required to have a bachelor's degree. These regulations would have required a master's degree. It was going to be very detrimental to rural areas. Number one, it'd create access issues for patients. It was going to be detrimental to employers that already have workforce challenges, especially out in the east in my neck of the woods. And then also, it's detrimental to the employees themselves having to go back to school, spend the money, and get a degree. And while I understand the logic behind it, I think overall this regulation was detrimental and would have caused an undue burden to a business, which is one of the reasons outlined that warrant a deficiency. Mr. Speaker, going forward, we did have a meeting on Monday, and we did find an additional 3 regulations deficient. But with that being said, Mr. Speaker, would you have the clerk report House Floor Amendment 1?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 1 to Senate Bill 65.
Gentleman from Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move adoption.
Question for the body is on adoption of House Floor Amendment 1. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. House Floor Amendment 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 3 proposed regulations we had issues with on Monday, we've been going over these for quite some time and had hoped to have a resolution. The first one I'll talk about, or first 2 I'll talk about, is 405 KAR 10001. That was the definitions dealing with Department for Natural Resources divisions of mine permits. We spoke earlier about this with Senate Bill 89. Then also 405 KAR 10015, dealing with general bonding provisions. These regs were filed in August, and again, like I said, I've learned a lot more about coal bonds than I ever thought I would. Learned a lot on this committee, but it was deferred 3 times at the agency's request. But ultimately, what it boils down to is increased performance bond costs to certain surface coal mine operations. And these bond costs would increase due to the recalculated long-term treatment of bonds. This has been addressed today in Senate Bill 89, which I applaud the gentleman for passing, and us as this body for passing. So those were those 2. And then also dealing with the Department of Financial Institutions, 808 KAR 3050, conduct of credit unions. This regulation was filed in I believe July, and it was deferred 4 times at the department's request. But essentially it allowed state-chartered credit unions with a low-income designation to accept non-member deposits, which would conflict with KRS 286 3.6-335. And so essentially it would harm communities because credit unions do not pay taxes, and this would subsidize credit unions while reducing revenue to the state and county. So essentially DFI, Department of Financial Institutions, was in violating a statute with this regulation. Mr. Speaker, those are all we found. Again, we file about on average 600 a year. These are 5 in 3 different areas. But be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I would move for passage of Senate Bill 65 as amended by House Floor Amendment 1.